So, hi everyone. I'm here with Caroline Wells today. Caroline, you're in your own consultancy looking around customer experience, vulnerability, complaint handling. Back in history, you were in charge of FOS as well. So, fantastic credentials. And thanks very much for agreeing to have a chat.
Oh, I wish I was in charge of FOS. I was in charge of a part of it.
Okay.
In charge of a part of it. Feels like a long time ago now. But yeah, I wanted to do something. It's a bit like you, actually. I just wanted to do something where I could help people on the other side of regulation try and get their heads around it.
So, obviously, you've been in this for a while, and I'm kind of interested in working with businesses and having a view across the industry. What do you think some of the main drivers of complaints are that you kind of see now, and some of the challenges that you come across when you're out there in the industry talking with people?
I think the big thing for me at the moment, and it's a societal thing, actually. It's not necessarily a customer service thing, because we know that a lot of us spent a long time getting our customer service kind of where it needs to be, and we've invested a lot in that. Actually, just from a societal perspective, as human beings, we are a little bit frayed around the edges, I think it's fair to say, because there's been a lot going on for people in the last 5 years. We know like people's tolerance levels are a lot lower, but also people's personal resilience. So that ability to be able to cope with stuff that some people might kind of, fly through, and then others just really struggle with process and what they need to do at certain points in time. So another thing is we're not getting worse at customer service. Crikey, the amount of stuff we're putting into customer service at the moment, it should be the opposite. But there's thing around the behaviours of, I'd say consumers, but we're all consumers too. So it's us.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I was looking at Trustpilot data the other day, and it feels like, Trustpilot scores are actually going up. So I was looking at a particular sector, they're actually going up. And yet you look at complaint levels, they're also going up as well. So maybe people are more ready to complain, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it might be, actually we've kind of nailed it in terms of, we always talk about making complaining easier for people. Like if we want people to tell us that they're unhappy, then we've got to do things to make it as easy as possible for people. So we might have made that easier, and that's had an impact on people being able to tell us. We might be more sensitive to what a complaint is and what it isn't now, and maybe erring on the side of caution. So I suppose you'd call that over-reporting. I think there's a move also with a lot of firms that I'm seeing who want to nip things in the bud for people before they turn into a complaint. So they kind of take the reins and start dealing with it. But that gets recorded, that gets logged.
How much of the psychology around sort of like not wanting to report things sort of goes into the discussions you have? So it's almost like you feel like, oh, that's a terrible thing. But on the other hand, they're also a fantastic way of getting insights and actually solving things. This is a great sort of like brand ad as well, right? So it really adds value to the brand if you're solving people, and it adds loyalty to the brand. So how much do you think there is that fear around complaint levels, and how much is that reality versus we should be embracing it to really undercover, better opportunities for better customer experience?
I think there is a fear still, and that depends on the culture of the organisation that you're in and how people view complaints and the worth of complaints, and also the worth of complaints teams as well. There are some commercial sensitivities for people, right? So some businesses, if it looks like they've got a lot of complaints, that might have an impact on the clients that they either have or attract. So there's a real kind of financial part to it. The more, I would say, probably enlightened type of organisation is the one that readily talks about complaints. And I mean, as in their senior leadership team will do videos and talk about the types of complaints that they've been seeing and what they've done as a result of it. They all make it really easy for customers to see what sort of complaints that they've had on their websites. They're not hidden, they're in plain sight, but then they also do things off the back of the complaints that they're receiving as well. So I think there is a tension. And I think in the past, we've always, I remember this back in the day, when we worked for a firm, we were like always trying to explain to people the reason why we've got so many complaints is that we had a big market share. That actually doesn't really mean anything to anyone. Not really. Like they sort of start shrug their shoulders and go like, and what does it mean? Why aren't you better?
Yeah, well, I remember the piece around is that a valid complaint or not, and just whether that's the right thing to do versus actually just looking through the data. And looking through the data can be quite informative, and particularly things like AI, I suppose, now where you can sort of almost like pull out themes, I would think, for firms. which is
Yeah.
probably really instructive now, because like you can look through 30,000 complaints and pull out themes much more easily than you could, even 5 years ago, it feels like.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a game changer. I subscribe to the idea that complaints are the tip of the iceberg and they can be really helpful and they can give you a heads up about things that people are unhappy. And even if a customer isn't technically right, actually they can have a point around how it's been communicated or, how someone told them. For me, the wealth of insight comes from just those daily interactions that we're having with customers. And if we don't have the correct level of intelligence or insight or technology to be able to capture them, we're missing a trick. Because that's where people tell us, when I talk to firms and they talk about, we've had a record number of inquiries today and we did a really good job because we've got everyone on the phones to deal with them in our service level. My response to that is, well, why were people needing to phone?
Mm.
What caused it? So if you deal with that, then it's lovely that you managed to deal with that kind of, pop-up situation. But do you want to stop it from happening again? In which case you need to understand why people started phoning and do something. So I just think there's this kind of untapped, or we're not tapping into it maybe as much as we could do, sort of resource of insights and the niggles and the grumbles and the kind of, the stuff that's not quite working properly that people just want to ask a quick question about. It seems like it's a really simple thing. It's small fry, but they're things that lead to complaints because if you get enough of them, it has this kind of drip feed effect on people. And then, it's the straw that broke the camel's back.
How careful do you think we need to be with, the move towards sort of like self-serve as an example, and sort of like automated processing and those kind of things? How careful do you need to be that sort of cuts off visibility over some of those interactions? Because I kind of agree, which is, if you a call with an agent or with an employee, then we, as human beings, we're sort of like information gathering machines, and all this information's happening even in this conversation, which can then be analyzed. But if we become more self-serve, do we lose visibility over some of that? Do we need to engineer that into our processes?
Yeah, and I think from a customer experience perspective, a few years back, I think we became so fixated on kind of removing sticky processes, remember that phrase, like sticky processes, and sludge as well, I think it was called. But then actually, I think now we've kind of grown up a little bit more around this. We sort of understand that sometimes these things have a place, but they've got to have a reason to be there, but they slow people down. If we make it too easy for people, you can quite quickly force someone to get into a situation that they didn't either expect to be in or wouldn't have done had they had a bit more reflection time. Right? So it was kind of like retrofitting some points within the customer journey to make people just think a bit before they do.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole thing anyway about people's ability to, and comfortableness really with, having conversations on the phone with people they can't see. Like we're seeing that a lot more now too. So people do gravitate to self-service because they're getting used to it now. But we've also seen people take mistakes because of it.
Yeah. Some people definitely want to have self-service. It's a preference for a large proportion of the population, and some people want to have that interaction. I suppose it's trying to get the balance right, isn't it? The right style of service at the right time when it's most appropriate. And I suppose that's the difficult piece, isn't it? Understanding like where do you sort of create that balance?
Yeah, I had an experience recently where I had a policy that I could take it out online, which was fine. And then when I went to cancel it, I had to phone to do it. I couldn't cancel it online. And all I did when I spoke to the person to cancel it was say, can I cancel my policy? And they said, yeah, no problem. That's it. No, it didn't add anything to it. It was actually a bit of a waste of everyone's time to do it. So that self-serve side of things would have been helpful because they weren't trying to retain me. I wasn't going off into another department to speak to someone to get a discount because that's not what I needed. I just needed to cancel it. My need wasn't there anymore for it. So we just got to kind of get those sorts of things still sorted. We're not quite there yet. We've done an awful lot, but those sorts of things do cause people frustrations and, annoyances. And get enough of them, and the next time you speak to someone, you tend to kind of express your dissatisfaction, don't you?
And I suppose that the digitalization, for example, of the complaints process is just, you want to have enough friction so people think about what they complain. And there's a bit of effort. There's a little bit of not a barrier, but a little bit of effort that's required just so you don't get spurious complaints. But you also need to make it easy enough so people really get real issues fixed, isn't it?
There is going to be an element of effort required for anyone to make a complaint. And actually, I think that's a healthy thing. for the person who's complaining to have to go through, because you need to think about what it is that you're upset with. You might not know what the answer is or what you want someone to do to sort it out, because a lot of people don't know, do they, at that point?
Mm.
Just having the chance to reflect on what's happened and then being able to articulate. And I know for some people that's really difficult to do. So we absolutely need to find another way for them to be able to tell us without it being too much of a heavy load.
And I suppose I was looking through financial services complaints data, and I think number one was motor finance as an example. I think probably unsurprising with everything that's sort of been going on in the background. I mean, what role do you think, particularly in the wider market, things like CMCs, complaints management companies, I mean, that they've had in terms of driving up volumes of complaints?
Huge, because it takes away the perceived hassle. I say perceived hassle because I think that's really what it is. It's not actual reality. I think it also creates a bit of a distance between the customer or the consumer and the business they're complaining about, because they're not involved in it.
Mm.
I wonder sometimes what that does to us psychologically around accountability and responsibility, understanding the impact of what we're doing. As a consumer who's complaining and using a claims management company, why would you choose to do it? Is it an effort thing? Is it you feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, it removes friction, doesn't it? I think one of the things, so it's
Thank-
advertising being sold as removing friction. I mean, I sort of obviously see the other side in terms of the headache it causes, particularly when 70% of them or something like that get denied as well. I mean, it's it causes a lot of volume that comes through, and a lot of cost, I suppose, as well. That's
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily return as being sort of sold in their favour.
No, nothing. The language is different. I've noticed that with the FCA too. If you're doing an advertising campaign that's telling people that they're entitled to compensation, that's not a complaint.
Mm.
In the way that I would see it, the money is here. You just need to let us know and we'll get it for you. So it feels like, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I want to try and see if I can get something
Yeah,
instead?
and how much do you think complaints in general? I mean, let's put CMCs to one side, but complaints in general are generated by media as well. So that's one of the reactions. So they used something was on TV as an example, of which motor finance was one of the areas. Oh, I can do this, and so we come to this almost like compensation chasing kind of culture where we're sort of like, well, I'm going to complain because I've been told I need to be upset about this as an example. So what's the balance between media items? And I think just going back to your previous experience, like media items seem to drive spikes in volumes. Is that really fair, or is that just people reacting to media and sort of like doing that sort of compensation kind of culture?
I think what I've seen when we used to have like the money mount come out, we used to just hang our heads and just think, oh no, what we're going to get next.
Yeah.
Because it just created this noise. And that noise continues. It continues in forums and chats, and people talk to each other about they might as well kind of do it. I think it does. I don't say it's a problem. I think my concern with it has always been that it attracts the kind of wrong consumer. Like, it's not the people who really need to have an issue that need to be looked at, because they're not necessarily in touch with those kind of media, for example. So you get a lot of noise, but you get a lot of noise from people who are tenacious, articulate, can put together an argument, know their way around things. So it attracts people. Does it attract the people who need the most help? I'm not sure.
It feels like we're getting the incentives wrong. So it's almost like if you make it very easy to complain, as an example, the incentive it's not necessarily balanced, right? If there isn't cost to do it, or there isn't sort of a little bit of difficulty doing it, then it's just becomes so easy and there's no consequence for me to basically do it. I might as well do it because I'm going to benefit from it. And whether we've gone so far that it's almost like inconsequential. I mean, a bit like social media. So at some point you could say what you wanted and there was no consequence to it. So people just said what they wanted, right? I do think on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, this is a completely different industry, but I've sort of seen behaviour in when you book a table in a restaurant online or at a pub.
Hmm.
And so you've got no interaction with the pub itself. And it's just so easy to cancel your table, 30 minutes before you're due to turn up, with no need to explain to someone why you've done it, not feeling guilty. And it removes all of that from kind of that human interaction. And I'm really interested in that, because I think that does change how people behave around these sorts of interactions. Because if I remove myself from it, then I'm not having to feel uncomfortable. I'm not having to explain myself to somebody else. I'm letting somebody else kind of do it all for me. It just masks what the problem might actually be, because it's very difficult to get the words from the actual customer about what it is that has gone on, or how they're feeling, or what's happened to them.
I mean, in that case, you don't know why they've cancelled the restaurant, as an example. It might be because they
Exactly.
found something else. It might be that they found a better deal. It might be their plans have changed. It might be that they didn't fancy it at the end of the day. And that's useful information, isn't it, that you're losing?
We lose the human aspect of the interaction. It becomes transactional. And I think that's, I suppose, the thing with complaints. It could end up being too transactional if we're not careful, losing those individual aspects of the person behind the complaint. We sort of lose all of that depth of insight, which I think is, particularly in financial services, that's quite difficult for us to square that circle when you think about everything that it wants us to do as well.
So obviously there's changes going on at the moment, I suppose, around proposed changes around fees. I mean, we've already got
Mhm.
fees for CMCs and in financial services. I think it was £250 to put that in. And there's more fees around sort of like how far you go down the resolution kind of path and different fees for different amounts.
Yeah.
How much do you think that will change behavior? And I suppose just linking back to your previous point, particularly around lower fees for resolving automatically up front. I mean, is
Mm.
that sort of going the wrong way? Do you think it's sort of like we're almost like we're incenting automated resolution rather than, manual resolution?
Yeah, it's long been a desire for firms to have a case fee structure that recognised when a case was resolved at the Ombudsman service. I have mixed feelings about it, if I'm really honest. I think there is some merit in it. I would feel for businesses where a consumer, for example, has pushed a case all the way through to an ombudsman. I mean, we know that they're looking at that process as well at the moment, and that might change. So it's not quite that easy to do that. But that'd be quite a bitter pill for someone to swallow, I suspect, if it's not of their doing and they've done everything correctly. I could see why in the past, when the Ombudsman has tried initiatives to kind of reduce the amount of work in progress or backlog, as you like to call it, then calling on firms to kind of review their cases, it was a stumbling block for a lot of firms. They were like, well, we can do it, but what's the incentive? And at the time, there was nothing. I suppose the thing that always in the back of my mind is I'm a strong believer in justice, and I wouldn't want firms to agree to things just because they can get a smaller case fee off the back of it.
Mm.
So, I'd want the decision to be the right one for that firm and that customer, actually. And for me, it's about, would that be the right answer, or is it the next best right answer?
It feels like it's a stepping stone, and there's been a series of changes that are gradually being made, taking us towards maybe a
Yes.
further end. I mean, I would look at it in terms of actually still paying a fee where the case is upheld for the firm and it was put through, en masse by a CMC. I mean, the firms are still paying, and it's like, well,
Mm,
that feels like that's a bit spurious. Should they really be paying? I don't think the consumer should pay, but should the
no.
CMC be paying maybe a little bit more because they put through spurious claims and they've done that sort of
Mm,
economic kind of calculation. So it
yeah.
feels like maybe this is the next step before we get there.
Yeah, and I think it is, and I think it's been a long time coming, really, because I think some of the initiatives that the Ombudsman use with firms, I think the publishing of data as well every 6 months too, that kind of really started off the conversation about the fairness of case fees in terms of where they're dealt with within the Ombudsman process. I would want reassurance that from the Ombudsman's perspective, they would only be progressing cases that needed to be progressed. I think that's the other thing too, is the safety net that sits behind that in terms of when does a case get resolved. It's resolved for the right reasons. It means the outcome is the right one for all parties concerned, and that things aren't going further forward in the process than they need to. That negates the whole point of having a tiered case fee structure.
Yeah. I mean, the other piece when we were chatting about just before was around, there's proposals out there around, does FOS and FCA start working close together? And I think we were chatting a little bit about sort of like
Mm,
seeing that in other industries as well, and sort of this merging of sort of like, oversight or complaints oversight and sort of regulators. I mean, what are the benefits, and I suppose some of the things we've got to be a little bit careful of with those kind of proposals, because there are proposals out for that at the moment.
we were just talking about how we're seeing other industries that have already done or are starting to do a similar things. So, economies of scale, so making it easier for the regulator and the ombudsman to generally need to speak to each other
Mm.
about these things that they're seeing and what's going on, I think are the benefits that come from that. I think I still veer towards the idea of having a separate ombudsman. I absolutely agree. They need to get much better at working together. They need to be a lot more nimble. They need to agree kind of their strategy so that they're both saying the same thing. Or if they're not, then they're very clear about why they're not saying the same thing so that we as an industry have an understanding of what's going on. It's how you make sure that the ombudsman process is completely separate from any influence or, dare I say, sort of interference from a regulatory perspective. Like, so how do we keep those individual complaints very much being looked at in that way and not having influence from other people? But then, you know, in the reality, when I've seen sort of models where regulators and ombudsman services come together, it's the same people doing the same role, probably not working that much differently, if I'm being perfectly honest, from when they were separate. So nothing much changes. So I don't, it sounds like it could be a really big thing. I'm wondering in reality how much of a big thing it would really be, you know, because we know that when regulators have changed in the past, like I've been around long enough to see a few regulators in my time, it's the same people that work in the regulator when they change a name. Like that doesn't change. The departments still stay the same. So there are definitely benefits to it. I can definitely see that in terms of joined up thinking, more kind of economy. What do you think?
I think there's pluses and minuses. I mean, it's clear there's, management savings. I think you get better alignment and those kind of things. But having that independent kind of view is a bit like internal audit. That's what I'm thinking when you're talking about it. But you want to have that reporting directly to the board. So they're actually a little bit independent rather than necessarily being as part of the management structure, so they can have that independence and they can say what they want to a certain extent. And I think it's good to have a body maybe that does that, that's probably a little bit separate from a regulator. But then you also need to be careful around incentives and cost and making sure they don't become massive and sort of overlay from a cost point of view. So there's pluses and minuses. I mean, a lot of these become badge changes rather than necessarily people changes, and things tend to move quite slowly. But we'll have to wait and see, I think.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see what other people feel about that. And I think it's one of those things where it looks like a big thing, and then I think the reality of it is probably not as big as what it could be.
I mean, outside of financial services, I know we talk a lot about financial services, but there's a whole other world out there of utilities, telecommunications, local government, all sorts of things. How do you see that sort of rolling down between the different industries, or being taken up in different ways by different industries? What are some of the things that are further ahead that can be applied? And what are some of the things in the other industries you think, well, that's a pretty good thing that we should put back into financial services?
I think we're quite spot in financial services, if I'm honest. A lot of the things that are being done started off in financial services, but there are some brilliant things that have happened off the back of kind of our insight into consumer behaviour and what feels right and what doesn't. I think there's been some interesting work in other industries around how do you offer products and services to people who perhaps can't afford the standard type of product, and better tariffs and those sorts of things. I think there's been some really innovative, interesting, it doesn't break the bank. Like the business is able to successfully continue to run. In actual fact, they become known for that sort of service that they provide to people. So I think there's something about the economically excluded that we could learn from other industries, certainly. I don't know if they've actually done some really interesting things around the communication side with customers, sort of like understanding what works and what doesn't, and then doing something about it. Like trying to make statements a lot easier for people to understand and read. And I know we've got the consumer duty, and that's part of it. We should be looking at our communications. I think we're still looking a little bit behind on that in terms of being where we want to be. Other industries have, not because they've got the consumer duty or an equivalent, but have been doing some really good stuff around communications as well.
And I think you make a good point there around vulnerability and sort of like support needs and those kind of things, because the other industries, and a lot of them have to provide service for everyone. So there's no sort of like risk management selection or those kind of things. They're universal services. And some of the thinking around support needs, the vulnerability support needs, and the fact that they've got the whole range of society, I think there's been quite interesting. How do you actually provide that and sort of go, really that extra mile to really provide support for people who are in really difficult situations? That is quite instructive in terms of the thinking around it. How do you think about it, and how do you apply that to your accounts? How do you apply that maybe in other industries as well?
Yeah, and I think where they've succeeded is they've created, I wouldn't call them products, but sometimes they're not even products, are they? Because they're services more than anything else. But what they've done is, rather than keep trying to break the process or break the product to make it fit for someone who's struggling or just needs something done differently, they've redesigned it so that it was flexible enough to be able to cope with whatever happens to people in life. And I think for me, that's kind of one of the biggest things is, I think historically, any sort of service provider, we've always kind of created our products and services on the basis of the perfect customer who will always pay on time, who never gets sick. You know, life doesn't really happen to them. And I think in the last 5 years, we probably have all more than ever realized that stuff can just take your legs from under you. And it doesn't matter how sensible or sometimes even how much money you've got in the bank. Where they've really shown kind of, I suppose, leadership and just a different way of thinking is about that. How do we create something that's going to work for people today? So we don't have people or customers kind of begging for help or feeling like they're being treated like a special case. And I don't just mean vulnerability. I mean just kind of generally, changing the date that your direct debit comes out. Like, it doesn't need to be war and peace for that to happen, but just having a decent conversation, whether it's web chat or whatever, and making it easy, actually, that person will remember that experience for, it might be a day, but it could be a week and a month and a year and, whatever.
Yeah. If you look at that across the whole of the industry, I mean, where do you think we're going? And if you were to offer 4 or 5 things that you think are the most important things for firms to consider, what do you think those would be?
It's a really good question because there's kind of so much. So I think obviously the first one is about the changes to the FCA and FOS from financial services perspective. I think that's obviously a really big thing that's on people's minds, and I think we need to pay attention to it. But I think also from the perspective of, this is going to sound like really blunt when I say this, but once they've got themselves sorted out, then where is the spotlight going to fall? It's going to fall back onto the industry again to see if actually we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So all the things that we've kind of wished for and asked for and campaigned for, it looks like it's going to come true. So then we have no excuses anymore. Like, we've got to get our house in order. And I think actually for a lot of firms, this is about us just holding the mirror up to ourselves now to be able to really think about, do we have the right level of resourcing to be able to serve our customers? So I think we need to look in just to really seriously think about, are we actually providing a service in the way that we should be doing? Do we have the resource to do it? Do we really value complaints? Like, what do we do with them? What options do we take off the back of it? And how verbal are we about that? How open are we truly about that? And then the ability to get better insight from the day-to-day stuff that's happening between us and our customers. I think that's true of any industry, because that's where I feel the richness is. And that's where I think we're lacking. And I think in terms of sort of like policy improvements and process improvements, we can't just rely on complaints data to point us direction. It will point us a little bit in the right direction, but it's the day-to-day stuff where the gold is.
And there's a wealth of information out there, isn't there, as well? I mean,
it's a huge amount. The difficulty is translating it into something that you could do something with.
Yeah, absolutely. AI can help us with that, certainly, hopefully. Well, Caroline, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. Definitely some real insights around that whole complaints process and how it's changing. I think it's something where we've got to really look through, how do we mine that information as much as anything, and then sort of use that to value the businesses and help with customers, I think it sounds like.
I think so. And I think we're going to be dealing with them. That's number one. Number two, we've got to start learning more from them and doing something with it.
Oh, fantastic. Caroline, thanks very much.
Thank you.